Hello, Ellen. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Heather. Thanks so much for having me.
I've been wanting to interview you for a very long time, and a lot of my clients have sent me your profile over and over and over again. So I'm very excited for this episode.
Oh, me too.
So The Anatomy of Anxiety caught my attention. That's the title of your book. How old is it now?
It came out, that's a really good question, 2 years ago.
Okay.
Almost exactly. Yeah.
And is that your only book that you have?
It's my first book, but I am already working on number two.
Number two. When's that one coming out?
That one is, it sounds like the distant future, but basically spring 2026.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a good one. You can't tell me anything right now, can you?
I don't know. I think we could talk about it.
I'm curious what that topic is compared to your other book. Is it related to anxiety?
I mean, everything is related to anxiety, but it's an evolution of the second part of my first book. So basically looking at the way, especially women, have deemed that intuitive, magical, witchy part of ourselves to be impermissible because, of course, we need to come across as rational and data-driven and emotionally even in order to be accepted into these boys' clubs of the world. But we're done with that.
That's going to be a good one. And I can definitely empathize with that. So The Anatomy of Anxiety, before I hit record, I wanted to come at this. We can come at this many different angles, but one of the kind of reasons, not necessarily the reasons, but parenting is a big challenge or curiosity for a lot of my listeners. It's how I got into this work. Of course, caring about my children and their own anxiety. But let's talk about this because I'm sure I've seen you do this as well, like the trends, the mental health trends online as well. And what is anxiety to begin with? And let's dig in a little bit of children's anxiety. And are they experiencing more anxiety than before? Are we just really focused on it? What's going on here? So what is anxiety? And is everyone just overly anxious?
So I always bristle at the idea of defining anxiety. I think that more than anything, it's a subjective experience. And then how people feel it varies. Some people feel a constant state of dread or tension in their body. Some people have a baseline of feeling calm, but it's punctuated by panic attacks. For one person, it can come out as social anxiety. For somebody else, even OCD tendencies are technically under this umbrella of anxiety. And what I think unifies it is that there's relationship to uncertainty and control, and I think this feeling of unease and suffering. And so I'm less interested in gatekeeping the diagnosis and really focused on, if somebody subjectively identifies with this term and is suffering, then let's address it. And there's actually, because I take such a different and functional medicine, diet, lifestyle based approach to healing anxiety, there's nothing to gatekeep because there's nothing risky that we do. Everything that I do to help someone with their anxiety generally actually improves their health. So there's nothing that we need to be keeping under lock.
So let's talk about why you wrote the book and kind of got to this maybe, well, it's not mainstream perspective on supporting anxiety. So why did you write the book in the first place? And what were you seeing in the work that you were doing?
Yeah, I wrote the book. I mean, I knew I was going to write a book because I just have a lot to say. And I think that we're not addressing the mental health needs of the population adequately. And we have so much room for improvement. I feel like I have a lot of unique takes on how to support mental health. Not to say it's the only right way to do it, but we just need to add these approaches to the conversation. And anxiety was what I was seeing coming into my office more than anything else. It feels to me like anxiety is the pH of our age. This is how we get out of balance. We subjectively experience it as anxiety. I think there have been time periods where one might be more likely to feel melancholy, to identify imbalance in a different way. These days, it's anxiety.
And then, so you were seeing this more and more. And so what are people oftentimes when I'm talking to parents, they're going down the route of like, we're seeking a diagnosis or there's been medical intervention. And I'm like, cool, what else is happening? Like, what else is going on here? And they're like, well, that's just what we were told. So we kind of just stop there. What's your perspective on diagnosis?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think it's ideal how much we have pathologized and medicalized emotional well-being. I think that even like Therapy Speak Online, which I'm a card-carrying member of, has us, there's a book right now, I think it's called Bad Therapy, but I forget the name of the author. But this is ways that we're ruminating on mental health, focused on mental health. Wouldn't that seem to be a good thing? But in certain ways, this can just make us more likely to suffer. And so the way I think about this is that we have all come of age with this particular paradigm of mental health, which tells us mental health issues are the result of a genetic chemical imbalance. It tells us that look at your mental health from the neck up. It's your brain chemistry, it's your serotonin, it's your psychology. And if you're not thriving, if you're not feeling good, then you have this genetic chemical destiny, but it's okay. You get treatment, there's a pill to fix that. And that's the story that we're told. It's actually myopic. It's nearsighted. It's not a comprehensive understanding of the evidence-based determinants of mental health. And it's our least hopeful narrative. And I'll pause and say, if that narrative ends up getting you to a place where you find relief from mental health, rejoice. This is a great thing. I have patients for whom that's the path for them. I think of healing as like this mountain. And for some people, the path up that mountain is a combination of medication and psychotherapy. And when that works, it's great. But I'm also keenly aware of the fact that there are millions of people for whom that does not bring adequate relief. And we've been leaving that chunk of the population high and dry. In fact, when we tell them that this is a genetic chemical imbalance, try this medication, and someone has tried that and gone up in dose and tried something else and added an augmentation strategy, and they're still symptomatic, they can start to despair. So it's this chunk of the population that I really want to get across to and say, there are other paths up that mountain and you're never stuck. There's always reason for hope. And so here's where I want to change the paradigm is that mental health issues are not a genetic chemical destiny. We are not locked in. It's not a fixed trait or something about us that will always stay the same. Mental health symptoms can be a number of different underlying things. Sometimes it's physical imbalance in the body. And those symptoms are just a communication from the body about a state of imbalance. And that can be pretty benign. It can be chronic sleep deprivation. It can be blood sugar swings. It can be inflammation, something off in the digestive tract. Seems kind of benign, but it can create these states that we give heavy duty labels to, like depression or generalized anxiety disorder. But then sometimes mental health symptoms have to do with psychospiritual imbalance. Do we have unresolved trauma? Do we not have community? Do we not have a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives? These matter too to our mental health. And the theme of all of this is that you're not stuck. There's something we can do about this.
So this belief or like, I am not stuck, like this is not my destiny. There is another way. I have to think outside of the box. I have to look for alternative answers. I also need to change my behavior, change my environment. I have experienced this as well, where it's like, what is this telling me? Where do I need to shift? Am I spending too much time inside? Like, am I getting outside? What am I putting into my body? Caffeine, all the things. That takes like a detective hat. That takes a different type of, I'm going to call it identity. I don't know what you would call it, but like a different perspective where I have some control or power over the situation rather than, well, somebody else told me that this is what's wrong with me. Therefore, I just took that as fact and truth. And that's it. So how do you get someone, regardless if it's for myself or a child or someone I care about, when beliefs are involved and identity of stories, how do you get them to like open up to an alternative perspective or a holistic one.
Yeah, you're really getting at the core of what's tricky about this, because it is a mindset shift. We've been very much taught to think of our mental health as this thing about us. It's genetic. We're powerless in the face of it, but you hand your power over to someone in a white coat with a prescription pad who can help you. And it's not up to us in many ways. And when we do say it's up to us, some people hear that as empowering and it gives them a reason for hope. And some people hear that as overwhelming, shaming, judgmental, and we just get very resistant to it and we want to rebel against it. I think about that meme that went around for a while of, I had to take my stupid walk for my stupid mental health. And it's like, we're resistant to the idea that diet and lifestyle can be supportive of our mental health. It's not a good feeling initially for a lot of people. It feels shaming. It feels like it's trivializing what feels heavy duty about our mental health. And we can feel somewhat foolish when we realize that, if we've been struggling mightily with something as big ticket, heavy as mental health, and then what gets us out of that hole was taking a 15-minute walk and eating slightly different foods and taking a slightly different approach to sleep, we can feel like, well, it's not comfortable to look at the fact that why didn't I do that in the first place? And we don't like it. And it's all effortful. And we, of course, understandably just want to take a pill. So it is a mindset shift. And I think that whatever we can do to help ourselves see that this has the capacity to be empowering and give us reason for hope rather than feeling overwhelmed or shamed or judged or blamed, I think that that's where we want to put our weight. And whenever I notice that someone's feeling overwhelmed by diet and lifestyle strategies to mental health, I point out that I'll give someone 50 things they can do to support their mental health. But it's not a directive that says, now you must do 50 things. It's a buffet. It's saying, here's an option of 50 different things you can start with. And you pick what feels accessible, approachable, resonant, and you start there. And if you just make one change, you will feel better. And usually as we make one change, we get a little more capacity for change. And then the next thing feels within reach. But we don't want to start by boiling the whole ocean. For many of us, we want to start by saying, I have no bandwidth. I'm in survival mode. I'm not feeling good. So don't tell me 50 things to do. And for those folks, often it's just go to bed a little bit earlier tonight, the next few nights, wake up genuinely rested, and then let's see what feels possible.
Yeah. And then, observing we have to get back to ourselves. How do I feel? How did that make me feel? And as you're talking, I'm reflecting on my own journey. And I just keep thinking about my health journey. And so 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer, and I had to kind of take a holistic perspective on that. And I remember clearly beliefs that I had and how angry and resentful that one healthcare practitioner was not telling me all the answers, right? They were coming from their lens. And that's where I slowly, even though I kind of went into it knowing that I was in control, I had control over, my actions and how I showed up, but everyone was there to support me, but no one had the one right way that I had to kind of have would it be agency or discernment of does this work? Does this feel good? Should I lean in more? And that can be incredibly emotionally uncomfortable to learn how to trust yourself and what does your body need? What does your mind need? And the other thing of that was when I did start to change my lifestyle habits, like nutrition and fitness or movement, I had to seek out specific people who were not, engrossed in diet culture. And that was interesting too, because I thought, oh, that's healthy. And then I'm like, no, that's not healthy. It was very difficult to find specific people in the wellness space with nutrition and fitness that were actually focused on mental health and not just physical appearance.
Yes. Oh, goodness. Yes. So there's so much in that. And I think that when it comes to that, how fragmented our medical system is, There's a line in my book that's your gut and your brain are talking to each other, even if your gastroenterologist and psychiatrist are not. And our body is this web of interconnections, but our healthcare system has it all seen as these discrete systems that aren't interacting. And so any one specialized practitioner has blinders on and is myopic to the understanding of how this is all interconnected. I think that often I'm pointing people toward practitioners like naturopaths who can take a bit of an overarching holistic view of things, but then still the only elegant sort of golden compass when it comes to all of these things is not find the one cult leader guru who's going to tell you all the right answers. All I really wish I could do is teach people to tune in. And when we can tune inward and know how our body is responding to a certain treatment, a certain food, a certain intervention, a certain mindset, if we can be in a keen dialogue with that information, we can't really get too far astray. That is what keeps us on our path. And so it's really just how do we get better at listening? And that's the more helpful message than here's all the exact right ways to eat or to live your life. Diet culture is rampant in the wellness world. And I'm writing a lot about this in my second book. So it's such a delicate balance. And on the one hand, anyone who starts with that empowering message of how we feed ourselves plays a role in our mental health, our physical health, our longevity, our health span. It matters what we eat. But then we instantly fall into all these pitfalls where we feel like our bodies are fragile. We start to fear food. We can become obsessive. We can decline social engagements. Meal prep becomes a part-time job, and that's not health. And so we need to always keep a mindset of ease around our food choices, that these choices happen through a lens of self-love, not anything else. But then I think on the other side, I want to represent the fact that our food system, I do think that we need to acknowledge we have processed foods that are engineered to be hyper palatable. And so we're between a rock and a hard place of orthorexia, trying to restrict, trying to eat in a particularly obsessively perfect way. But if we fully slacken the reins, we can't the arms that we're falling into are not with integrity. And so we actually do need to discern and make these really moment to moment self-loving choices of where do I find ease and pleasure with food, but not hand myself over to a food that has been engineered to be a drug.
Mm-hmm. I remember specifically when I was trying to change my eating, how overwhelming I found it to like make a green smoothie. Like I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, is this organic? And just the slippery slope. I wouldn't say I was ever orthorexic. I never fall into that trap, but I was always questioning, like, if I put an apple in here that is not organic, why are you trying to make me afraid of this non-organic apple? Like I believe that the thoughts of like fear were worse than the actual food itself. And that's just food. So now I want to put this other layer on top of this of, I know I have control over myself. Like I am in control of me, whether I want to acknowledge that or not. But now I'm raising children, and my three boys are currently 19, 14, and 11. And when they're younger, of course, I make their plate. There it is. And I'm just using food. Of course, there's movement and all the things. Let's throw screen time on top of this. Let's throw all the other things. You know where I'm going with this. And I'm getting calls from the school saying, your child is this, your child is anxious. My children don't want to go to school. I'm kind of like playing the narrative of everything that these people are telling me. And, I don't have much control over that. And the older they get. So where does that play in when I am trying to support a child, especially as they're becoming teenagers or young adults, into the world when now I have no control over all of these things. And I can very clearly see how some of their lifestyle factors are playing into their mental health.
Yeah, yeah. And just to sort of address the smoothie and the inorganic apple, I mean, on some level, I resent the fact that, because you're exactly right, that fear is also an unhealthy ingredient in our life. But I resent the fact that we even have to be stuck between that rock and the hard place
Yeah.
because our food system is so lacking in integrity. And so we're in a tricky pickle with that. With children,
Tricky
it's
pickle. I like that one. I'm gonna find myself saying tricky pickle. I like this.
but it's with children. I think that we do have to be real about the fact that the consequences here are serious. You know, this is not light. And we look at the mental health trends, and screen time, social media is a massive impact on that. I think that an underappreciated impact is processed foods and chronic sleep deprivation, which relates to screen time and social media, but it also relates to school schedules and hustle culture. I think that when I really face how grim and how out of our hands is, I go to escapist fantasies of, well, why don't I just raise my daughter on a farm in Costa Rica, and there will be no screens and nature will be her school, and we're going to homestead and raise chickens and make our own sauerkraut. And I think that it's tempting because it does feel like such a broken world that we're bringing our children into. But in my more realistic moments, I think that we have to be choosing the harm reduction strategies that are most impactful. And I think that maybe two that I think are particularly impactful. One is just having any kind of moratorium around screens and social media in the evening before bedtime. And so it's not, that the phone gets thrown into the ocean, as much as I would love that solution, but it's that you choose an appropriate bedtime, which for most of us should be earlier than it is, because social media and screens are suppressing our melatonin, and it's a phase delay that's impacting our whole population. We're all staying up later as a result. So choosing an appropriate bedtime, and then saying the hour before that, we dim the lights in our home, it's mellow, we're not scrolling on our phones. And then that's going to support a child's sleep. It supports their melatonin release, which supports hormonal health and balance, which supports the sleep and supports cognitive function the next day, mental health the next day, longevity, growth, brain development. You get a lot of bang for that buck just in protecting bedtime. And I think that requires protecting evening screen use. And then I think the power that we have to co-regulate our children. So it's a crazy world out there, and understandably that's impacting us alongside our children. But we have more developed brains, we have more developed executive function, we have more strategies and tools and skills for finding our own self-soothing and grounding. And I think the more that we can do that and recognize the power of when we can create a state of a regulated nervous system in the presence of our children, even though it might look like they're la 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 going crazy, it is helping them sync up. It's helping them get a model for what that looks like and feels like. And it's a powerful way that we can regulate them, even though we can't control what's happening during the day. And so that just motivates us to focus on our own self-regulation.
Which is very annoying, but it's very true. So it always comes back to us, right? We're on our screens, we're working, and then we're like, okay, the boundary, time to get off. And they're like, well, you're on. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm kind of working, I'm kind of not working. And it's like, damn it, you called me out. And so if that's uncomfortable for us, just imagine what's happening in their young brains. I'm just hearing you talk a lot about boundaries, like inner boundaries, external boundaries, and then also the systems at play and how we're just beating ourselves up of like, this is me. And it's like, but look at the systems that we are raising our children in, and with, and we gotta harm reduction. Like you said, what can I do that is not going to like consume every ounce of my being?
We come by these struggles honestly, right? We are swimming in these waters. And I think you're absolutely right. It's so annoying. Everything I recommend is actually incredibly annoying. And so that is to be a person in wellness. But I think that it's annoying to have to use our own phones less. And yet I'm increasingly convinced by the fact that what we do the first hour after we wake up and the last hour before bed, to me, I think of it as almost like that's the altar at which we are worshiping. So do we want to worship at the altar of doom scrolling, or do we want to worship at a different altar? And that could be being present with our family, being with a pet, being in nature, being in stillness, reading a book, listening to music, dancing. There's so many better things to worship than the doom scroll. And so it's annoying until you get into it. And then you're like, this actually does feel good, but the transition sucks. And I think that there's other ways that we can work on regulating our own nervous system that I actually think are delicious. And part of what I interpret to mean keeping my own nervous system regulated, it's crying often. It's being really authentic and real when things are not honky-dory. And I actually find this one to be liberating, because we might have been, we've come of age in this emotion phobic world that tells us that emotions are too much and a burden and uncomfortable, embarrassing. We're squeamish about it. But if we start to give ourselves permission to cry in a full and ugly way, to give our kids a nuanced understanding in a developmentally appropriate way of like, you know, we're not slapping on a smile and saying everything's fine, which is much more anxiety provoking for our children because they're sophisticated social creatures. They can see that what we're saying is incongruent with how we're feeling. So that just lets them think like, well, what is going on? Because I'm not getting the whole truth. And so I think to talk through what's feeling heavy, balancing it with the nuance of the situation, all of this is helpful for our own nervous systems, modeling something good and being authentic with our kids, but also it ends up being enriching to our own lives, to cry more, to give ourselves permission to be authentic about what doesn't feel good. And so all of that ends up feeling kind of nice once we start to get to the rhythm of it.
Yeah. I'm hearing you talk a lot about identity and just like the slow and subtle shifts. We don't need to be all or nothing into making these changes. And I just find that the older, you know, as we age and get older, like if you are not consciously evolving or changing your behavior just slightly, like we're slowly just declining and going down the hill. So it's like, let's just chip away and change a little bit. Before we wrap up though, I feel like I've heard you talk about this, the benefits of anxiety and how it can be like a gift and a strength as well. I think people are like, I have anxiety. And I'm like, yes, we all do in some capacity, but what are the strengths of anxiety?
Yeah. So this is the central thesis of my book is really that we have false anxiety and true anxiety, where false anxiety is avoidable anxiety. And it's the anxiety based in the physical body. It doesn't have to be happening. It's not some essential truth. It's unnecessary suffering. And it's caused by things that get our physical body out of balance. So that's the sleep deprivation and the blood sugar swings and being over caffeinated, being hungover, being inflamed. We just need to identify the root causes of those, address them little by little, and eliminate all of that unnecessary suffering. But true anxiety is not something to pathologize. It's not something that we want to decaf coffee our way out of or suppress with medication. True anxiety is not what's wrong with us. This is what's right with us when we are able to viscerally connect to what's wrong in the world. And I talk about this in my book as a form of a superpower. I think the anxious folks, what we're calling anxious folks, are people that are sensitive with a wide open antenna. And these are our artists. These are our intuitives. These are our healers. This is a good thing. Our community needs this and benefits from it. I think it's an aspect of, we have a diverse population. We need all types of people. We need someone who can be our pilot or our surgeon and stay calm under pressure. We also need somebody who's going to viscerally feel when there is suffering in the world around them and say, this is not okay and it has to stop. We need both types. And so if you are the type of person who viscerally connects to the suffering and it makes you feel uneasy, don't pathologize that in yourself. And certainly don't try to medicate that away. Give yourself permission to be that person. See it as both a liability and an asset, and how you are an asset to the community with this skill and this tendency. And then where we really get good with true anxiety is we want to practice listening to it and heeding the message. So this has to do with whether it's meditation or journaling, or you do shamanic shaking, or you cry more, or you're in therapy, or you work with psychedelics, but some way of getting better at listening to the message of our true anxiety and then allowing that to fuel purposeful action. Because there's almost always a call to action baked into our true anxiety. It's saying course correct in this way or show up to this cause. And once we mobilize, we don't feel mired in our anxiety. We feel imbued with purpose.
I'm smiling because I'm like, oh, you just give me more and more permission. I talk to my anxiety like it's a child trying to get my attention. And I ask it, why are you here? And it's usually trying to keep me safe or course correct in some capacity. Or sometimes it's like, chill out on the caffeine. Like you need whatever type of anxiety it is, like as I'm labeling it. And then that deeper whisper, that knowing, which takes time. It's a skill. And it's like, what do you need? I always ask, what do you need from me to feel safe, to like calm down? And it will whisper, right? It might say you need way more time out in nature, or you need to chill out with your phone, or whatever it is. And that's the knowing, that's the guide. And when we start listening that way, it doesn't feel so scary.
I mean, that's the whole takeaway that I want people to come away with, which is even though we've been taught that our mental health is a genetic chemical destiny and it's something about us, that couldn't be further from the truth. We are not destined to suffer in these ways. We might be suffering from some degree of false anxiety where our bodies are out of balance. So we need to identify what's causing that imbalance, address it, eliminate unnecessary suffering. But we also want to get good at slowing down, getting still, and practicing the art of listening to that little whisper that's baked into our true anxiety that tells us you need more time in nature. You are an artist and you need to be creating something. You have a message to share, a perspective, a gift, a unique contribution to make. Or maybe you know that there is suffering in your community and it's not okay. And whatever small role you can play in this, mobilize and start playing that role. And so it isn't so scary anymore. And the anxiety itself isn't the problem. It's the communication of imbalance or of purpose.
I say that again. It is not the problem. It's the communication.
Yeah, that the anxiety itself that we've been taught is the problem, or even the diagnosis or the thing about us. Anxiety was always just the communication. It's a symptom, and it can be telling us there's physical imbalance, or it can be communicating about unresolved trauma or unmet psychospiritual needs. And when we recognize that it's a communication, then we just listen for what it's communicating and start to take steps to address that.
Love it. Can you talk a little bit about where people can find you, your book? I know you, like you said at the beginning, you have another one coming up, so where they can stay connected, all the things.
Yeah. So my book, The Anatomy of Anxiety, is my whole life's work rolled into 200 pages. And it's basically this Mr. Fix-It approach to false anxiety. But then it really encroaches into the more metaphysical about what are the questions we grapple with when it comes to true anxiety. I'm fairly active on Instagram. I'm at Ellen Vora MD. And people can also find me on my website, ellenvora.com.
I love that. I love how you say fairly active. I'm always redefining my relationship with Instagram, and sometimes I'm in, sometimes I'm out, and I'm like, I love connection and the relationships that can be built, and it's just having really healthy boundaries with it. So
same, girl.
Yeah. Thank you, Ellen. I'm so grateful for you and your work, and I really encourage everyone to go get a copy of your book.
Oh, Heather, thank you so much for your wonderful podcast, and thank you for having me on it.
Thank you.